Welcome to Politics Up Close on KPCW. I'm Jeff Robinson. Money and politics go hand in hand, right? Well, as we've seen recently from the Occupy protests in Salt Lake City and across the country, many people are upset about the influence of corporate and PAC money in government. And so is my guest this morning, Pete Ashdown, founder and CEO of the Salt Lake City-based internet service provider X-Mission. That's why he's launched a second campaign for the U.S. Senate, running as a Democrat in the 2012 election to tackle that systemic challenge. How does he plan to make this campaign more successful than his previous venture in 2006 against longtime incumbent Senator Orrin Hatch? Ashdown joins me now in the studio to discuss his campaign and the ideas behind it. And, Pete, it's great to have you here on the show.
Thank you, Jeff.
Listeners, join us on the air with your questions and comments for Pete Ashdown. How would you tackle the influence of money in government? And do you think he can win this race? We're at 801-355-TALK. That's 801-355-8255. Pete, first of all, when did you decide that you were going to run for Senate a second time? And what were some of the factors going into that decision?
You know, I considered running in 2010, and the state of the economy and the state of my business and also some concerns with my family held me back from doing so. So most of 2011, I was chewing this over and talking with my family and talking with some past people who were associated with my campaign about it. And it wasn't until really about September or October that I really firmly decided to do this.
And so is it pretty similar to your reasons for running back in 2006, or are things pretty different this time around?
You know, my education in 2006 pretty much changed the face of my campaign throughout that campaign. I started fired up on digital rights and the Internet and the impression that Orrin Hatch was giving people of people who, from Utah that we weren't wise about the Internet, that we were reactionary. He made a couple comments, around 2003 about blowing up, terminating computers that violate copyright that made me quite angry. So I started on that tack, and I found that, most people really didn't care about it. But what I did find is that people care about accountability. People care about transparency, across the political spectrum. And there's a continued thirst for the accountability in Washington that is not coming. And I made a lot of advances in my campaign that utilized the Internet, that opened my campaign, that allowed anyone to help craft the policy and platform. And I was hoping that some of those sparks would catch fire and other people would grab onto it. And I've seen President Obama have some of these situations where you enter a question or a petition online and they answer it, and I've been disappointed to see how they have reacted to that. They've really kind of discarded it and ignored it rather than embraced it.
So why did you decide on the U.S. Senate versus running for Congress or a state-level office? U.S. Senate really might be the single most difficult thing to run for, that and governor. So why did you settle on this particular race?
It is absolutely a difficult thing in a statewide race, but I believe the U.S. Senate is one of the most dysfunctional governmental bodies we have in the United States, and I believe that's where I can make the most impact. With these technologies that I have worked on in my campaign to open access to my office, access to my campaign. These are things that I would translate to the U.S. Senate and open my office for people to inspect the meetings I'm having, the decisions I'm making, and be part of the process rather than shut out. I know that a lot of people say, well, you should, and a lot of people have asked me to run for mayor and run for Congress and climb the political ladder. But again, U.S. Senate is where I think I can make the most impact, and it's where my experience is as well as far as past campaigning.
This is Politics Up Close on KPCW. My guest is Pete Ashdown, a candidate for U.S. Senate once again in 2012 and founder and CEO of the Salt Lake City-based internet service provider X-Mission. You can join us on the air with your questions and comments for Pete at 801-355-TALK. That's 801-355-8255. When it comes to how you're going to run this campaign, Pete, Well, first of all, what were the most successful elements of your 2006 campaign that you can do once again this time and emulate or improve upon for 2012?
Well, the openness of my campaign was absolutely the most successful aspect. It was something that had never been tried before and has, unfortunately, in my opinion, not been duplicated since. It was something that got a lot of attention, not only nationally but internationally. And it's something that I will continue to expand upon, and I have a few ideas about how that can be done and how people can be more involved with the campaign online. The other aspect that I learned in 2006 is that the press doesn't really care if you make a policy statement. Yeah, and that's no disregard to you, Jeff, and others, but I had a couple press conferences where I made pledges and I came out with platforms, and, they sunk like stones as far as people were concerned. But if I painted my motorhome, if I drove 25,000 miles throughout the state, or if I had a dinner for the hungry instead of a benefit for me, it was front page news. And so I think that there is an aspect of politics, and I have to say I have to give credit to Randy Horiuchi for teaching me this, where you have to get people's attention by doing something unusual. And I have a few ideas about how that can be done. This campaign, I'm keeping them up my sleeve until I do them, but there is a certain amount of showmanship to running a campaign.
When you talk about the openness and transparency, let's hear some of the more specific details. So how did you use the Internet to improve your campaign? I mean, obviously you're an Internet entrepreneur with great expertise in this field. What did you do last time that made it more transparent, and is there a way you could perhaps even make that better this time?
One of the things we did was set up a wiki, and initially it was just done for organizational purposes, and then I thought, well, why don't we put some policy out there and see what people think about it? So anyone could come in, regardless of their policy, regardless of their politics, regardless of their background, and contribute to that. And I have to say I pulled a lot of wisdom out of that. I know the Internet really well. I know technology really well, but some of these other issues, such as healthcare, defense, I depend on people in those areas to understand how they work as well. And having that open discussion, that electronic blackboard that allowed anybody to come in and sketch notes and give facts or information to, really helped me come up with, I felt, what was the best policies. And it's funny because when I decided to do this again, I thought, well, I've got to start crafting policy all over again. But I went to my website, which I've kept up and running since 2006, and I found that most of those policies did not need a lot of tweaking. And I think that the reason for that is that they came from good sources. They came from people that were committed to those causes. And I think, there's an idea that there's a whole lot of noise that's generated on the Internet, and it's hard to rise above that. But on a wiki, you can only write something so many times before you are kicked off as a noise generator.
Right.
A lot of people discredit Wikipedia for saying, well, that information can come from anywhere, but still its accuracy is better than most other sources out there. And the openness, of course, is what's key to that. And I just wish we could translate that to our government, have that kind of openness in government.
You write on your campaign blog, quote, "One of the regrets I have in the last campaign is being suckered by other elected Democrats into their email address-sucking contests where supporters of each candidate were encouraged to vote for their favorite candidate." I didn't know about this. Tell me about that.
Yeah, there were, and I won't name names, there were a number of Democrats in their leadership PACs and they'll do it again this cycle as well, where they run contests and they say, okay, we want your supporters to vote for you, and whoever gets the most votes and whoever gets the most support will get money from our leadership PAC. And when you're running a tight campaign, that's very attractive to try and get some cash influx to help pay salaries, to help buy the signs, help buy stickers, and so on and so forth. But it comes with a drawback in that you have to send this out to your email list, and I've got a few thousand people on my email list who want to hear from me. Mm-hmm. And then they have to go and register on the site of these leadership PACs, and suddenly they start getting email from all these other elected Democrats. And in my mind, as I said, it's just an email-sucking ploy. They really don't care about getting those Democrats elected. If they did, they would have responded to my letters that I sent to those PACs and sent to their offices. I literally had one senator that responded to me, and it was like, well, good luck. And that was about it. So I think that the chase for money and the PACs are part of the problem, which is why I've sworn off of not only leadership PACs, but PACs altogether. Incumbents are financed upwards of 90% by PACs and special interests. And I really feel that when you look at all the problems we have in our government, whether it's what to do in the economy, what to do with the health industry, and for health care for Americans, it's all influenced by money. By people who have the loudest voice in Washington, the people who have the most lobbyists.
And we'll talk about that in more detail in a couple minutes. So is there anywhere you look at your 2006 campaign besides the email contest issue and you would say, I really could have done much better in this area? Anywhere where you look at it and say you can make a vast improvement for your next campaign in 2012?
Absolutely. There were lots of lessons learned. I spent a lot of time getting out throughout the state and doing things like parades and Democratic events, and I think those were essential for a first-time candidate. And what I feel fortunate about now is that I can concentrate more on bridging that 20% gap between 30%. Well, let me explain. Most Democratic statewide candidates walk away with the 30% margin, and Peter Caroon and Sam Granado in 2010. Peter Caroon spent $2 million, and he came away with 30% of the votes. Sam Granado spent about what I spent in my Senate race, a little over $200,000, and came away with 31% of the vote. Mm-hmm. So I think there's assumed. Since I got 31% in 2006, there's that work I feel has already been done. I have to close the gap to the 51%, and so I probably won't be doing as many parades. I probably won't be doing as many just get to know Pete Ashdown events.
Right.
It'll be more focused on getting my name out to everyone else.
This is Politics Up Close on KCBW. My guest is Pete Ashdown. He's founder and CEO of the internet service provider X-Mission and a candidate for U.S. Senate for the second time in 2012. And we want to hear from you this morning. Your questions and comments were at 801-355-TALK. That's 801-355-8255. We're going to take a short break now and be back with more Politics Up Close here on KCBW. Welcome back to Politics Up Close on KCBW. I'm Jeff Robinson, speaking this hour with Pete Ashdown. He's a candidate for U.S. Senate in 2012, a Democratic candidate, and also founder and CEO of the internet service provider X-Mission. We want to hear your questions and comments for Pete at 801-355-TALK. That's 801-355-8255. You can also send us some tweets as well at KCPW. So, Pete, we've been talking about how a big part of your campaign platform is reducing the influence of money in government. Certainly a lot of focus on that right now with Occupy Wall Street and other efforts. When did you first become concerned about this issue, or have you pretty much always been concerned by it?
I wouldn't say it was as acute for me in 2006 as it has been in watching the Obama administration and some of the things it has done. I was disappointed at the outcome of the health care debate. I think that was heavily influenced by the insurance companies. And I was disappointed to see how some of the bailouts were handled. I think that some of the loans that were made were necessary, but there was very little transparency and accountability on those loans. I think that there are people on Wall Street who should be in jail today. When we hear about, I read a story this morning about a woman who was put in jail for food stamp fraud, mm-hmm. that she had stolen about $4,000. And she had paid that money back and still had to do jail time. And yet some of the things that have happened on Wall Street, I believe, if they were going to get those loans, their assets should have been seized. There should have been bonuses. There should have been some hardcore trials and people held for what they had done. But I believe the influence in Washington steered things in another direction, that the money that has soaked up our system continues to, that a small percentage is what holds sway in Washington instead of the rest of us.
And so would you say that you sympathize entirely with the Occupy Wall Street protests? Is your message pretty similar to what their message is?
On an economic basis, I do. I think I have some differences in how they're accomplishing that. I think it's really difficult to run an organization on a horizontal basis where you have no leadership whatsoever. If you do that, any a lunatic can come in with their agenda and try and push it. There has to be times where you say yes and no to people participating. I have been impressed with how they have conducted themselves, and I think it's a symbol of the larger problem that a lot of people agree with, that the politics of Washington are not for the American people. That it's if you wanted to run for office, you do need to raise $4 million or be independently wealthy. I think that's a travesty. We need more people in Washington who are working class, nurses, infantry, computer programmers who have life experience. There are a lot of people in Washington who don't even have never had a job, and it's hard for them to have that perspective on what it's like to make the mortgage and make the monthly bills. And so again, it's a very lopsided system, and we're shut out. And I believe Occupy and to some extent the Tea Party as well has the same complaint, that it's not for the majority of Americans that the political system in Washington operates for them.
You have pledged not to take any money this time around from PACs, political action committees. How is that going to affect your fundraising strategy, and how difficult would it be to run a statewide campaign without this type of contribution?
To be honest, it doesn't affect it a lot. In 2006, it was about 4% of my fundraising, but it was a whole lot of time that was wasted. And as I said earlier, the influence of PACs is much heavier when you're an incumbent, when they feel like there's somebody to carry the water for them. That they'll more heavily invest in keeping that person in office. And I don't want this race to be about Orrin Hatch. I want this race to be about my ideas. But Orrin Hatch, it for me, epitomizes the brokenness of our democracy and the influence of money. I think that there are a lot of things that can be done on the cheap. In 2006, I tried to sign on to Facebook, and it was only for students back then.
Right.
Twitter was embryonic and didn't have a lot of sway. So Twitter, Facebook, Google+, other methods of getting out there are much more pervasive now, and I believe that things are heading in that direction. I think in 2006, much of my effort online was like television was in the early 50s for politics. It was kind of, people were checking it out, and people were saying this might turn into something. But with the way Barack Obama used the internet and the way other politicians are using the internet to push their message forward, it's becoming much more pervasive. And I think will be the end game in politics, that it will allow a lot of people to participate.
Don't you think for the time being, though, that traditional advertising, broadcast advertising, radio and television, and even print and newspapers still is going to play an important role in campaigns, and for the time being, that still costs a lot of money?
Absolutely, and that's another change from my last campaign, is as we got through the year, we had spent most of our money by the time we got to October and November. I'm really trying to keep my powder dry, raise money now, raise money throughout the year, and stockpile that so I can buy that traditional advertising in October and November and get my message out.
This is Politics Up Close on KCPW. My guest is Pete Ashdown. You can join us on the air at 801-355-TALK. That's 801-355-8255. You're running as a Democrat in this race, Pete. We've recently talked with former Salt Lake City Mayor Rocky Anderson, who's starting a new party because he says both Republicans and Democrats have been bought off and paid for by corporations. Do you agree with that? Do you agree with him when it comes to your own party, the Democratic Party?
I have a lot of complaints about the Democratic Party, and again, they source back to the money influence. I do believe the Democratic Party still has a great platform. That the reason I'm a Democrat is I believe that they are more interested in the individual than they are in the organization, whether it be businesses or large groups. For me, I would not abandon the Democratic Party because I continually look back to the figureheads like Roosevelt and Jefferson and Kennedy and think what would they have done in the same situation. You know, I think Roosevelt was in much of a similar situation with the crash of the stock market and the economic situation, and yet he showed guts and he showed courage and he showed spine. One of my favorite quotes about Roosevelt is when he was coming up with the SEC and regulating Wall Street. The people on Wall Street were gnashing their teeth about that, and he said, "I welcome their scorn." There has been bravery demonstrated in the Democratic Party, and I'm not ready to give up on the Democratic Party. I think there are a lot of inherent problems that come from the money involved, but I think they can be solved.
When it comes to campaign finance reform, what would you like to see in Washington? What kind of overhaul would it take to really change this system from the bottom up?
Well, I think it's going to have to come from the bottom up in the same situation that most amendments to the Constitution come from the bottom up. I've been watching the excellent Ken Burns Prohibition series, and it's no matter how ill-guided that amendment was, it did rise from the bottom, and it rose mostly from women who didn't even have the right to vote at the time. So I do think it's possible to overhaul our campaign finance system. I do believe it needs to be a constitutional amendment. There is a great website that somebody pointed out to me on my blog called Get Money Out that has a number of proposals for constitutional amendments, but I think that's the next thing we need to do.
David is calling from Salt Lake City. David, what's your question or comment for Pete Ashdown, candidate for U.S. Senate?
Hi, Mr. Ashdown. I'm for sure going to vote for you, and I wanted to know how you felt about the redistricting practices of the Republican Party in the Salt Lake area and what you have in mind to change those practices. I know they're kind of in a closed-door atmosphere, and it seems like, if anything, that redistricting should be open to public input, and I wanted to know what you thought about that whole situation. Great
question, David. Thank you.
I was disappointed but not surprised about the redistricting that happened in Utah. Before that, it was the exact same situation. I used to go on I still do. I go on a morning run that used to cross all three districts of Utah, and I don't run that far. But I could probably still do that now. The core of the problem here is that the public is locked out. That any sort of public hearings they did have about the redistricting were discarded in the end, and I think that this is not unusual. Gerrymandering, I was in North Carolina in 2001, and the Democrats were gerrymandering there. And in California, they actually had a computer program redraw the districts with the sole intent of preserving incumbency. And they have islands and loops and donuts, and it's a mess. But where the federal government can come in and say this is what you need to do to redistrict is a very difficult proposition. This is something that is left up to the states to decide, and I believe that the remedy for this kind of thing, again, is accountability, transparency, and campaign finance reform. if we have these people that are putting forward these ridiculous proposals, whether it be redistricting or any other thing, message bills and such, that they need to be voted out, but they need to be on a level playing field with their challengers, and that can only come through campaign finance reform.
All right, David, thank you for your call. 801-355-TALK, 801-355-8255 is the number to call to be on the air with Pete Ashdown, candidate for U.S. Senate and president and founder of the Internet Service Provider X Mission. And Pete, as someone... in order to run for the Senate, you're going to have to get through the Democratic State Convention to get your party's nomination. Do you think that's going to be easy or difficult, that part of the campaign?
I know of one other individual who has expressed intent of running for Senate. I actually had a meeting with him before I decided to do it, and he asked me, well, are you going to do it? And I said I was on that track to do so. But I encouraged him to do it. I want as many people as possible participating in the political process. When you have one candidate go in, you don't get that robust debate. And so if he comes to convention, I welcome the challenge, and we'll see what happens. I'm certainly going to make an effort on the Democratic side to get out to all the county conventions, to shore up the people who have supported me in the past, and not take anything for granted.
On the Republican side, do you think, assuming you win the nomination, that you would be running against Senator Orrin Hatch, or do you think it's more and more likely that it'll be somebody else, like Senator Dan Lillienquist from the state legislature, or another Tea Party challenger? It seems like most people would say right now his biggest opposition comes from within his own party.
Yeah, but I don't think, unlike Senator Bennett, that Senator Hatch takes anything for granted. He's a very shrewd campaigner, and he's been steering to the right for the past year, abandoning things like the DREAM Act that he supported in the past and S-CHIP. I think Orrin stands a much better chance of getting through convention, but, anything can happen in the Republican politics, and who had heard of Mike Lee before 2010?
Right.
So I made the mistake the first time around of making my campaign an anti-Orrin Hatch campaign in a lot of ways. And I found that a lot of our efforts to beat Orrin up and be hard on him, as people ask me to, be a bulldog on Orrin Hatch, fell flat. And they really didn't put me forward, and disappointed a lot of people as well. And I think a lot of people want that nastiness out of politics. So I'm talking about the overall issues, how I can change Washington, how I can make an impact back there, how I can do things like the e-Congress and bring the connectivity back home to the political process.
Another caller on the line for you, Pete. Bob is calling from Salt Lake City. Bob, what's your question or comment for Pete Ashdown?
It's about public campaign reform. Do you support public campaign financing?
Yes, absolutely, and I believe it will take a constitutional amendment to do that.
Okay, great. That's what we wanted to know. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for your call, Bob. We also have a question for you from Twitter. Pete Tyler Young asks, how would Pete provide leadership to the Senate on issues like SOPA, I believe that's an internet piracy bill,
yes,
and the Patriot Act? So your positions on those and how you would provide leadership on those two issues.
As I look to the U.S. Senate, there are a lot of people who have expertise as far as being an attorney or being a career politician, but I don't find anyone who I respect as far as technology and the internet goes. And so these issues of net neutrality and SOPA and copyright, I certainly want to be the go-to person and speaking out on those as soon as they come up. And I've tried to do that over the past 6 years, that when these federal and state issues come up, I'm the one who is out there in the front of it and telling people what I think about it.
801-355-TALK is the number to call. We still have a few minutes left with Pete Ashdown, a candidate for the U.S. Senate in 2012. Well, we focus so much on the influence of money in government. What other issues are the main platforms of your campaign, Pete? Are there any things at all when it comes to immigration or health care, which you mentioned, or other issues that you want to bring with you to Washington to provide leadership on?
As I was telling you earlier, Jeff, a lot of those things have been covered in my 2006 campaign, and people can go to my website and get the laundry list of issues that I think are important. I believe health care, as I said, I was disappointed in how that turned out. I believe in a public option. I believe that we need to have private health care financed by a public system, because my experience with running X-Mission and the enormous expense I pay every month in insuring my employees, which I think is an essential part of business, is debilitating to a lot of other businesses. It's very hard for my business to meet that. And when I see presidents of insurance companies buying $25 million houses and mansions, I feel like health insurance has turned into a casino. That and it's a life and death casino as well, and it's just a bad system to protect Americans. We can do better, and I think other countries have done better. It's not a matter of single payer for all or Medicare for all in its entirety, although I think that would be a great step. But countries like Japan have been very successful with like a two-tier system.
When it comes to the national debt, what are your thoughts when it comes to, is it going to be cutting spending? Is it going to be both? Is it going to be raising taxes on the wealthy? I believe your blog does talk about balancing the budget, so it sounds like that is a big concern for you. How should that be done?
I believe in a mix of cutting and tax. I wouldn't say they're increases, but they're resumptions of the previous levels is what they were. Getting rid of the Bush tax cuts is, of course, one of the things. The thing that was remarkable about that blog entry that I did on balancing the budget is it seems relatively easy. The New York Times had a great webpage you could go to and balance the budget based on what things you wanted to increase and what things you wanted to cut, and I was able to do it in the space of an hour. The political aspects of that is another problem. Things like the F-22, which has been, in my mind, a failure in our military-industrial complex and a failure for, from what I understand with my friends in the military, for deployment, is something that has parts from every single state. So there is jobs that are on the line for the F-22, and cutting that is a political nightmare. But we need to, I think one of the things most dramatic to me about the military is how much was spent in Libya and how much was spent on Osama bin Laden, and in contrast to how much was spent in Iraq and Afghanistan. We need to be smarter and leaner and trimmer. And when you're talking about the Russians spending $30 billion a year now on defense, and the Chinese, our closest competitors, spending $200 billion. Why do we need a budget of upwards of $800 billion and the trillions that will eventually be spent on both of these wars?
And finally, Pete, what would you say to political observers, or anyone for that matter, who looks at your candidacy and says, well, Pete's going to, run this campaign, he's going to get his issues out there, but at the end of the day, he's going to be the token Democratic candidate and, take another 30 or 35% of the vote, and that's basically it. What would you say to those people?
I know what happens if I don't run, and I know the outcome of that. And if I do run, I do have a chance. And I'm going to be optimistic. I'm going to be in it to win it. But there are certainly large hurdles to jump over. And being a Democrat in Utah, you have to be persistent. You have to run lots of times. And Cal Rampton was not elected until his third race. And, the other politician I sympathize with a lot because he was gangly and skinny like me is Abraham Lincoln. Had to run several races before he was elected. And thank goodness he didn't stop because he changed our country for the better.
We have been speaking with Pete Ashdown. He is a candidate for U.S. Senate in 2012, running for the second time as a Democrat, and also the CEO and founder of the internet service provider X-Mission, based here in Salt Lake City. And Pete, thank you for your time. We look forward to speaking with you again as this campaign season goes on.
Thank you, Jeff.
This is Politics Up Close on KCPW. We'll be right back.